If Alexander Mercer asks something of you tonight, you do it, Caleb, because this marriage is the only thing standing between two families that have forgotten how to forgive. Richard Bennett delivered the warning without looking at his son, his attention fixed instead on the tall doors leading into the ceremony room. Caleb Bennett felt the words settle heavier than the wedding ring waiting on the other side. At 23, he had imagined marriage as something chosen after years of ordinary moments, not an agreement negotiated by attorneys and family representatives. Yet tonight, he was about to marry the 35-year-old alpha who controlled the rival Mercer family. For most of Caleb's life, Alexander Mercer had existed as a warning spoken at Bennett dinner tables. Cold, unforgiving, dangerous when challenged. Caleb had never been allowed close enough to discover whether any of it was true. Now a peace agreement required him to become Alex's husband. And if I cannot do this? Caleb asked. Richard finally looked at him. You can. That was not an answer, and they both knew it. Minutes later, the doors opened. Caleb walked into a room filled with people who looked relieved by a marriage neither groom had requested. Alex waited at the front in a dark suit, composed enough to make Caleb feel even more uncertain. He was taller than Caleb expected, but there was no satisfaction in his expression, no triumph at receiving the son of an enemy family. When Caleb reached him, Alex gave a small nod. Nothing more. The ceremony lasted less than 15 minutes. The promises sounded strangely formal, built around peace, unity, and responsibility rather than love. When the ring was placed on Caleb's hand, polite applause filled the room. Caleb wondered how many people were celebrating the marriage and how many were simply celebrating the possibility of waking tomorrow without another crisis between the families. An hour later, a black sedan carried Caleb through the gates of the Mercer estate. His suitcase rested beside him like proof that everyone expected this arrangement to be permanent. Alex sat across from him during the ride and asked no questions. That silence frightened Caleb more than conversation would have. Inside the house, Alex dismissed the waiting staff and led Caleb upstairs. Caleb's heartbeat quickened when Alex opened a bedroom door. The room beyond was spacious but unexpectedly simple, with a bed, a desk, tall windows, and a second door leading to a private bathroom. Alex placed a key on the desk. This room is yours. Caleb stared at him. Mine. The lock works from inside. Nobody enters without your permission, including me. Caleb looked from the key to Alex. Why are you telling me this? Alex removed a folded document from inside his jacket and placed it beside the key. Caleb recognized the marriage agreement immediately. Your father signed this. My representative signed it. I signed it. Alex tapped the final page. You did not. Caleb's confusion deepened. I stood beside you and said the vows. Because two families placed you in a room where saying no carried consequences. Alex's voice remained calm. That is not the kind of agreement I intend to exploit. Caleb had prepared himself for commands. He had prepared himself to negotiate for privacy, for dignity, perhaps even for the right to continue the graduate program he hoped to enter next year. He had not prepared for the enemy alpha to acknowledge that the choice had never truly been his. What do you expect from me? Caleb asked. Alex stepped toward the doorway rather than toward him. In public, enough cooperation to keep the treaty stable while we determine what comes next. In this house, nothing you do not freely choose. Caleb searched his face for mockery and found none. My father said I should do whatever you ask. Something changed in Alex's expression, subtle but unmistakable. Your father does not make rules in my home. And you do? Alex glanced at the key. Not for you. He stepped into the hallway. Lock the door if it helps you sleep. Caleb looked down at the wedding ring that had felt like a chain less than 2 hours earlier. Alex. The alpha stopped. Why are you doing this? For the first time that evening, Alex's composure seemed to crack. There was exhaustion behind it, and something Caleb could not yet name. Because stopping a war required me to marry you, Alex said quietly. It did not give me the right to hurt you. Then he walked away, leaving Caleb alone with a locked door, an unsigned agreement, and the disturbing possibility that the man he had been taught to fear might be the first person that day who cared whether Caleb had ever wanted the marriage at all. Caleb locked the bedroom door that night, then spent nearly an hour wondering why Alexander Mercer had been the one to suggest it. By morning, suspicion had replaced some of his fear. Kindness from an enemy could still be strategy, and Caleb had grown up hearing that the Mercers never did anything without calculating what they would gain. He dressed and found breakfast waiting downstairs, but Alex was already seated at the far end of the dining table reading several documents. He looked up when Caleb entered. "Good morning." Caleb stopped beside an empty chair. "Am I supposed to sit somewhere specific?" Alex lowered the papers. "Wherever you want." Caleb deliberately chose a chair halfway down the table rather than the one beside him. Alex made no comment. A staff member approached with coffee, and Caleb thanked her before noticing how carefully she avoided looking at his wedding ring. The entire house seemed aware that its newest resident had arrived through negotiation rather than romance. "I want to read the agreement," Caleb said. "You should." Alex pushed a folder across the table. "That is your copy." Caleb opened it and immediately noticed handwritten amendments attached to the original document. "These were not there when my father showed it to me." "No, you added them?" "My attorney did, at my request." Caleb read the first amendment twice. It guaranteed him a private bedroom and prohibited anyone from entering without his permission except during a genuine emergency. The second stated that Caleb retained independent access to transportation, personal finances, education, and communication. The third was even stranger. No member, employee, or representative of the Mercer family could issue instructions to Caleb on the basis of his marital status. Caleb looked up. "Why?" "Because the original agreement gave both families too much authority over our private lives. You signed the original to keep negotiations moving. Then I changed what I could before the ceremony." Caleb turned another page. "My father agreed to these?" His attorney acknowledged them. Caleb felt a quiet anger rise beneath his confusion. Richard had warned him to obey Alex, yet he had apparently known that Alex himself had written protections against exactly that expectation. "Can I leave the estate?" Caleb asked. "Yes." "Without asking?" "Yes." "Can I visit my family?" Alex paused. "Yes, although I would prefer you tell someone where you are going." Caleb immediately stiffened. Alex noticed. "For practical reasons, not permission. The situation between our families is calmer, not resolved. So I am still being watched." "No, I am asking you to let the household know whether to expect you for dinner." Caleb almost laughed at how ordinary the answer sounded. "That is your concern?" "My chef becomes personally offended when meals are wasted." Caleb stared at him, uncertain whether the feared head of the Mercer family had just made a joke. Alex returned to his documents. Caleb closed the agreement, but did not move. "What happens if I refuse to play the part everyone expects?" Alex looked up again. "Which part?" "Your husband. Standing beside you at dinners. Smiling for people. Pretending this was romantic." "You do not have to pretend anything. The treaty depends on people believing this works. The treaty depends on both families honoring its terms." Alex leaned back. "Your expression at dinner is not a diplomatic instrument." Caleb studied him. "You really expect nothing from me?" "I expect honesty when something affects both of us. I expect basic respect in this house, and I will give you the same. Beyond that, I would rather learn what you choose than train you to perform what other people want." The answer unsettled Caleb more deeply than a demand might have. Demands would have confirmed everything he had been taught. Alex kept refusing to behave according to the story Caleb knew. "My father said the Mercer family respects strength," Caleb said. "Sometimes. He said an Omega who appears weak in this house will be treated like one." Alex's expression hardened, but not toward Caleb. "Your father has never lived in this house." "Then tell me the rule." Alex stood, gathering his documents. "There is only one rule you need today." Caleb waited. Alex nodded toward the folder. "Nobody gets to use that marriage certificate as permission to control you. If someone tries, tell me." "Including you?" Caleb asked. Alex met his eyes. "Especially me." He left for his morning meetings, and Caleb remained alone at the long table. Slowly, he reopened the agreement. The signatures were there. Mercer, Bennett, attorneys, witnesses. Entire families had decided what this marriage was supposed to accomplish. Yet beside those official pages sat 3 amendments written by the man Caleb had been warned would take away his freedom. For the first time, Caleb wondered whether he had entered the home of his enemy, or whether he had simply spent his entire life accepting someone else's definition of who the enemy was. By the 4th morning, Caleb had begun waiting for the monster everyone had promised him, and Alexander Mercer kept failing to appear. Alex left for meetings shortly after breakfast, and usually returned before dinner, never asking Caleb where he had spent the day or whom he had called. Caleb tested that freedom carefully at first. He walked nearly 2 miles into town alone, bought coffee, visited a bookstore, and returned expecting questions. Alex only glanced up from a document and said, "The chef wants to know whether you will be here for dinner." Caleb almost resented how ordinary it sounded. The next test came when his father called. Caleb answered from the library, expecting privacy, but watching the doorway anyway. Richard asked whether Alex had threatened him, restricted his movements, or demanded access to Bennett information. "No," Caleb said. His father went silent. "Nothing. He gave me my own room." Another pause. Do not mistake patience for kindness. Caleb looked toward the open library door. "Did you know about the amendments?" "Those details are irrelevant." "They do not feel irrelevant to me." Richard changed the subject, warning Caleb to remember where his loyalty belonged. After the call ended, Caleb remained beside the window with an uncomfortable question growing inside him. Why had his father sounded more concerned by Alex behaving well than relieved that Caleb was safe? That evening, the Mercer family hosted a small dinner for representatives involved in maintaining the peace agreement. Caleb dressed formally because he assumed his presence was required. When he came downstairs, Alex looked surprised. "You are joining us? Am I not supposed to?" "Only if you want to." Caleb frowned. "Would it look bad if I stayed upstairs?" "Probably." "And you still would not make me attend?" Alex adjusted his cuff. "If this peace depends on forcing you to smile through dinner, then everyone at that table has already failed." Caleb joined anyway, partly because he wanted to observe Alex around other people. He expected arrogance. Instead, Alex spent most of the evening listening. When an older Mercer representative spoke dismissively to a young staff member who had brought the wrong folder, Alex corrected him with a quiet sentence. "She made a clerical mistake, not a moral one. Speak to her accordingly." The man immediately apologized. Caleb noticed something else. Nobody at the table seemed frightened of Alex in the way Caleb had been taught to expect. They were careful around him, certainly, but the atmosphere felt closer to respect than fear. After dinner, Caleb found Alex alone in the library reviewing paperwork. "Can I ask you something?" "You usually do." Caleb ignored the dry humor. "Why does my family talk about you like you are incapable of mercy?" Alex stopped reading. "That is a complicated question. Give me a complicated answer." Alex considered him for several seconds. "Our families have spent years interpreting every disagreement in the worst possible way. Eventually, stories become easier to inherit than facts. That sounds convenient." "It should. Your family probably says the same thing about mine. They say you destroyed the last peace negotiation." Alex's expression changed. "Do they?" "You know they do." "I know what happened." "I did not know what version Richard gave you." Caleb stepped closer to the desk. "Then tell me yours." Alex closed the folder. "Not tonight." Caleb felt irritation rise immediately. "Why not?" "Because if I give you my version before you have access to anything else, I am doing exactly what your family did. Asking you to accept a story because someone with authority told it well." That answer stopped Caleb. Alex opened a drawer and removed a small brass key. He placed it on the desk. "The records room is across the hall from my office. That key opens the diplomatic archive." Caleb stared at it. "You are giving me access?" "To the negotiations concerning both families, yes. Read the records. Decide what you believe. And if I find something that makes the Mercers look guilty, then you will have learned something true." Caleb picked up the key. "You are not worried about what I might discover?" Alex returned to his paperwork. "I am more worried about you spending your life believing things nobody allowed you to question." Caleb left the library with the brass key closed inside his hand. The next morning, he entered the records room and spent hours reading agreements, meeting summaries, and correspondence from years of failed negotiations. Most documents matched what he already knew. Then, near the bottom of an archived folder, he found the report concerning the peace conference his father had mentioned for years. Caleb read the dates once, then again. According to the records, the Bennett representatives had formally withdrawn from negotiations 27 hours before Alex issued the decision Caleb had always been told destroyed the talks. Caleb sat motionless at the table. The document did not prove Alex innocent of everything. It proved something more personal and immediately painful. Someone had changed the order of events when they told Caleb the story, and for the first time since the wedding, the The person he feared most was no longer standing inside the Mercer estate. Caleb carried the archived report into breakfast the next morning and placed it beside Alex's coffee. 27 hours, he said. Alex looked at the document, then at Caleb. You found the conference record. My father told me you ended the negotiations without warning. According to this, the Bennett delegation withdrew more than a day before your decision. Alex set down his cup. That is correct. Why did nobody tell me? I cannot answer for your family. Caleb remained standing. Then answer for yourself. What happened? Alex motioned toward the chair across from him, but Caleb did not sit. Alex accepted that. The Bennett representatives rejected the final proposal and formally withdrew. My side responded the following day by ending several temporary agreements connected to the talks. And that became the story that you destroyed the peace conference. Apparently, Caleb hated how calm Alex sounded. You knew I believed that about you. Yes. You could have corrected me the first night. Would you have believed me? Caleb opened his mouth, then stopped. He remembered arriving at the estate convinced every quiet gesture concealed a threat. Probably not. That is why I gave you the key. Caleb finally sat down. There are other records I want to see. Then see them. No restrictions? Anything involving negotiations between our families is available to you. Caleb watched him carefully. You are either extremely confident or extremely good at hiding things. Those possibilities are not mutually exclusive. Caleb almost smiled, then remembered why he was angry. Over the next 3 days, he spent hours in the archive comparing dates, meeting notes, and copies of correspondence. The picture that emerged was not simple enough to make the Mercers innocent and the Bennetts guilty. Both families had made decisions driven by pride, suspicion, and old resentment. But Caleb found something more troubling than blame. Several stories he had heard since childhood were missing crucial context, and the missing details almost always made Alex appear worse. On the third evening, Caleb found a copy of a proposal from 2 years earlier offering neutral mediation between the families. The Mercer side had accepted. The Bennett side had declined. Caleb remembered Richard telling him the exact opposite. He took a photograph of the page and called his father. Did the Mercers accept neutral mediation 2 years ago? Silence answered first. Why are you asking? Richard said. Because I am looking at the signed response. You should not be reading Mercer records. That is not an answer. Caleb, those documents were prepared by the enemy. You cannot trust everything you see. There is a Bennett acknowledgement attached. Another silence. Caleb felt something inside him shift. Why did you tell me Alex rejected mediation? Because you do not understand the circumstances. Then explain them. Richard's voice became colder. Your responsibility is to keep this marriage stable, not investigate decisions made before you were old enough to participate. Caleb stared at the wall. You sent me here because you said peace depended on me understanding who Alex was. Peace depends on you remembering who you are. The call ended moments later without an explanation. Caleb remained in the hallway until he noticed Alex standing at the far end. How much did you hear? Caleb asked. Enough to know you probably want privacy. Alex turned to leave. Wait. He stopped. Caleb held up his phone. My father says your records cannot be trusted. A reasonable concern. You are agreeing with him? You should verify anything important through independent sources. Caleb stared at him. You make it very difficult to argue with you. I have been told the opposite. Caleb walked toward him. There is a Bennett acknowledgement attached to the mediation proposal. Alex nodded. I know. Why would my father lie about something I could eventually verify? I do not know that he lied. He may believe the version he told you. That is generous. It is cautious. Alex's expression became serious. Do not replace one inherited certainty with another simply because you are angry. Caleb looked down at his wedding ring. For days earlier, he had thought the ring connected him to the most dangerous man in his life. Now he was beginning to understand that danger could also come from certainty, especially when someone else had built it for you. I want copies of everything connected to the last 5 years of negotiations, Caleb said. You can have them, even if I take them to my family. Alex paused only briefly. Yes. Why? Because truth that only survives inside a locked room is not very useful. Caleb looked at him for a long moment. You really are not going to stop me from investigating you. Alex shook his head. No. Then his gaze dropped briefly to the ring on Caleb's hand. But I think you should start asking why anyone else would want to. Caleb found the first real answer in a document that was never supposed to matter. It was a routine planning memo from 6 months before the wedding, buried among schedules, property discussions, and preliminary treaty proposals. One sentence stopped him cold. The Bennett delegation recommends Caleb Bennett as the preferred marriage candidate due to the high probability of incompatibility with Alexander Mercer. Caleb read it again, certain he had misunderstood. He had not. Beneath the sentence was another note suggesting that a failed marriage could provide grounds for withdrawing from the broader agreement if Mercer conduct created sufficient public concern. Caleb carried the document directly to Alex's office. "You knew?" Alex looked up from his desk. One glance at the paper in Caleb's hand changed his expression. "Caleb, you knew they expected this marriage to fail." Alex stood. "I suspected it." "That is not the same answer." Caleb placed the memo on the desk. "They chose me because they thought I would hate you." Alex remained silent. "They thought I would be frightened enough to leave, and then they could blame you." "That was one possibility." Caleb stared at him. "How long have you known?" "Before the ceremony, I received information suggesting someone inside the Bennett organization opposed the treaty." "And you still married me?" "Yes." The word hurt more than Caleb expected. "Then why?" Alex moved around the desk but stopped several feet away, leaving the distance between them untouched. "Because refusing the arrangement would have ended negotiations immediately. Both families were already looking for proof that the other side was acting in bad faith. So you used me to keep the treaty alive. I accepted a marriage I did not want because I believed it could prevent the situation from getting worse." "That sounds very noble when you say it that way." Alex absorbed the accusation without defending himself. Caleb continued. "You knew I might have been selected as bait. I knew it was possible. And you never told me." "No, why?" For the first time, Alex looked uncertain. "Because on the first night you already believed I was capable of controlling you. If I told you your own family might be manipulating you, it would have sounded like exactly what a controlling husband would say." Caleb hated that the explanation made sense. "You could have given me the evidence." "I did not have enough." Alex pointed toward the memo. "Neither does that document. It shows that someone expected incompatibility and considered exploiting it. It does not prove who approved that strategy or how far it went." Caleb looked down at the page. "My father signed the delegation summary. He signed a packet containing more than 40 pages. That does not prove he wrote or even noticed every internal recommendation." "You are defending him again." "No, I am refusing to accuse him without evidence." Caleb turned toward the window. Everything he had believed about the marriage was shifting too quickly. First Alex had been the threat. Then the treaty had seemed like protection. Now the treaty itself looked less like peace and more like a stage on which someone expected Caleb to fail. "Was I ever a person in these negotiations?" he asked quietly. Alex did not answer immediately. "Not often enough." Caleb looked back at him. "And to you?" Alex's expression softened. "From the moment you stood beside me and looked like you wanted to be anywhere else." Caleb almost laughed, but the emotion caught somewhere deeper. "That is a terrible answer." "It is the truthful one." Alex returned to the desk and removed another folder. "There is more." Caleb's stomach tightened. Inside were copies of communications sent during the weeks before the wedding. Several anonymous messages warned Mercer representatives that the Bennett side might later claim Caleb had been pressured or mistreated. Alex had ordered his attorneys to document Caleb's freedom of movement and add the protections Caleb discovered after the ceremony. Suddenly, the amendments made sense. They had not been gestures invented after Alex met him. They had been defenses prepared before Caleb arrived. "You thought someone might use me against you," Caleb said. "Yes." "Then those rules were protecting yourself." "Partly." Alex did not pretend otherwise. "But they were also protecting you from becoming useful to anyone who needed this marriage to collapse." Caleb closed the folder. "What happens now?" "You decide what you want to do with what you found." "You are not going to tell me?" "No, even if my decision damages the treaty?" Alex held his gaze. "Especially then." Caleb looked again at the memo that described him as a probability instead of a person. For the first time, his anger was no longer aimed entirely at Alex or entirely at his family. It was aimed at the arrangement itself, at every room where people had discussed his future while assuming he would behave exactly as predicted. "I want to know who wrote that recommendation," Caleb said. Alex nodded. "Then we find out." Caleb noticed the word immediately. "We." Alex paused. "Only if you want my help." Caleb studied the man he had been forced to marry, the alpha who could have turned every discovery into an argument for loyalty and had instead kept returning the decision to him. Slowly, Caleb pushed the folder back across the desk. "Help me." Alex nodded once. "All right." And in that quiet office, the marriage changed for the first time. They were not lovers, and Caleb was not ready to call them allies. But they were finally looking in the same direction, toward whoever had expected fear to do the work that force could not. The answer arrived 2 days later, and it did not come from the archive. Caleb was finishing breakfast when his phone rang with a call from his father. Richard did not bother with small talk. "Come home today." Caleb set down his coffee. "Why?" "There are concerns about the agreement." "What concerns?" "This is not a conversation for the phone." Caleb glanced across the table at Alex, who continued reading without reacting. "Are you asking me to visit? Or are you telling me to leave my husband?" Richard went quiet. "You sound different." "I have started asking questions. Alexander has been filling your head with his version of events." Caleb looked directly at Alex. The alpha raised his eyes, but said nothing. "Actually, he keeps telling me to verify everything myself." Richard's silence lasted longer this time. "Come home, Caleb. We need you here." The call ended before Caleb could ask anything else. He remained seated, staring at the dark screen. Alex folded his newspaper. "You should go." Caleb looked up sharply. "That is convenient. It is your family. And if they want me there because they are planning to end the treaty, then you should hear that from them." Caleb stood. "You know what happens if I leave this house now? People will say the marriage failed. People say many things. This agreement could collapse." "Possibly." Caleb stared at him. "And you are still telling me to go?" Alex rose and walked toward the sideboard. When he returned, he carried 2 envelopes. He placed the first in front of Caleb. Inside was a copy of the marriage agreement. The second contained a signed legal document. Caleb read the heading and felt his breath catch. It was a separation agreement, already signed by Alex. "What is this? A way out? You prepared this?" "This morning." Caleb looked at him in disbelief. "Before my father called?" "Yes." "Why?" Alex rested both hands against the back of a chair. "Because we agreed to investigate together, and then I realized something. If you believe staying here is necessary to protect the peace, then you are still being forced to stay. The pressure simply has a different name." Caleb looked down at Alex's signature. "If I sign this, what happens?" "You leave. My attorneys handle the legal process. Nobody from the Mercer family interferes with you. And the treaty? We try to preserve it through other terms." "Try. I will not lie to you. Your departure could weaken it." Caleb pushed the document away. "Then this is not freedom. You are asking me to choose between myself and everyone depending on this agreement." Alex's expression tightened. "No. Other people created that choice. I am refusing to make it for you." Caleb stood and walked toward the window. "You could stop me from leaving. I could attempt to. Your family controls this estate. Your name carries more influence than mine. You could say it was necessary. Necessary things still require limits." Caleb turned around. "What if letting me go destroys everything you have spent years trying to build?" Alex looked at him for a long moment. "Then I build something else." The simplicity of the answer struck Caleb harder than any declaration could have. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you risk that for someone you barely know?" Alex's voice softened. "Because I know enough." Caleb waited. "I know you were brought into negotiations you did not design. I know people predicted your fear and intended to use it. I know you have spent days discovering that some of the stories you inherited were incomplete. And I know that if I use those circumstances to keep you beside me, then I become exactly the man you were warned about." Caleb looked at the wedding ring on his hand. "You really would let me walk out?" "Yes. Even if I never come back." Alex hesitated, and that hesitation told Caleb more than an immediate answer would have. "Yes." Caleb swallowed. "Would you want me to come back?" Alex looked away briefly before meeting his eyes again. "That is not a fair question while you are deciding whether to leave." "I asked anyway." Alex exhaled slowly. "Yes, Caleb. I would want you to come back." For the first time, the words between them carried something that had nothing to do with negotiations. Alex continued before Caleb could respond. "But wanting you here does not give me the right to keep you here." Caleb folded the separation agreement and placed it inside his coat. 2 hours later, his suitcase was in the same black sedan that had carried him through the Mercer gates after the wedding. Alex stood outside the house, but did not approach the car. Caleb lowered the window. You are not sending anyone with me? No. You are not going to call my father? No, what are you going to do? Alex gave him a tired smile. Wait to learn what you choose when nobody in this house is choosing for you. The car moved toward the gates. Caleb looked back until Alex disappeared behind the trees. The wedding ring remained on his hand, but for the first time since the ceremony, nothing prevented him from removing it. That freedom should have felt like escape. Instead, as the Mercer estate vanished behind him, Caleb realized the most frightening part was no longer that he had been forced to marry Alexander Mercer. It was that the first person willing to let him leave was becoming the one person Caleb was no longer certain he wanted to leave behind. Caleb knew something was wrong before he finished crossing the Bennett foyer. His father was waiting beside the staircase with 2 senior family advisors, and nobody seemed relieved to see him. Richard looked first at Caleb, then at the wedding ring still on his hand. You came alone. Alex did not send anyone with me. Richard's expression tightened. He allowed that. Caleb set down his suitcase. I did not need his permission. One advisor exchanged a glance with the other. Caleb noticed. Why did you call me home? Richard led him into the study and closed the door. The Mercer agreement has become unstable. We need a public statement confirming that you returned because the marriage conditions were unacceptable. Caleb stared at him. That would be a lie. It would protect this family. From what? From Alexander Mercer controlling the narrative. Caleb slowly removed the folded separation agreement from his coat and placed it on the desk. He signed this before I left. Richard read the first page, and for one brief second, Caleb saw surprise replace certainty. He let you leave voluntarily? Yes. Then he is trying to make himself appear reasonable. Caleb almost laughed. Is there anything he could do that you would not interpret as manipulation? Richard did not answer. Caleb spent the next 2 days reviewing Bennett records under the excuse that he wanted to understand his family's position before making any statement. This time he did not begin with old negotiations. He began with the memo that had identified him as the preferred marriage candidate. The document carried an internal reference number, and that number led him to correspondence from Victor Hale, one of the Bennett family's senior advisors. Victor had repeatedly argued that lasting peace would weaken the influence of people whose positions depended on permanent distrust between the families. None of the messages openly admitted sabotage, but the pattern was impossible to ignore. Victor recommended Caleb for the marriage. Victor predicted incompatibility. Victor drafted language for a public response if Caleb left the Mercer estate. Then Caleb found the message that changed everything. It had been sent 3 weeks before the wedding to a private Bennett committee. If Mercer permits unrestricted contact, emphasize emotional coercion. If Mercer restricts contact, emphasize physical isolation. Either outcome can support withdrawal if presented correctly. Caleb read the lines until anger replaced disbelief. The plan had never depended on what Alex actually did. It depended on making anything he did look wrong. Caleb printed the message and carried it into his father's office. Richard read it in silence. Did you know? Caleb asked. Not about this. Victor works for you. Victor advises several members of the organization. Did you know he recommended me because he expected the marriage to fail? Richard sat down heavily. I knew some advisors believed you and Alexander would be incompatible. I believed the marriage itself would force both families to behave carefully. So you knew I was being placed into a situation people expected to collapse. I believed I was preventing something worse. Caleb looked at his father and heard an echo of Alex's explanation, but there was one difference he could no longer ignore. Alex had admitted the cost of his decision and then given Caleb a way out. Richard was still defending the decision as though Caleb's consent had never belonged in the calculation. I am not making your statement, Caleb said. Then what are you going to do? Find out how many messages Victor altered before they reached either family. Richard stood. Caleb, this is bigger than you. That is what everyone keeps saying whenever they want me to stop asking questions. That night, Caleb continued searching through archived communications. Shortly after midnight, he found matching records from 2 negotiation cycles. Messages originally written as compromises had been summarized internally as threats. Requests for neutral meetings had been described as refusals. Each distortion was small enough to seem like interpretation, but together they had kept both families suspicious for years. Caleb copied everything onto a secure drive and sat alone in his childhood bedroom as the truth settled around him. He had spent his life believing the conflict continued because the Mercers and Bennetts could never trust each other. Now he understood that certain people had benefited from making sure they never tried. His phone lay on the desk. Alex had not called once since Caleb left. No demand. No question. No attempt to influence what Caleb discovered. Caleb picked up the phone and opened Alex's contact, but he did not call yet. First, he looked at the separation agreement. Alex had given him freedom even when freedom might cost him the treaty. Caleb finally understood what that choice meant. He removed the wedding ring and placed it beside the unsigned separation papers. For several minutes, he looked at both. Then he packed the evidence into his bag. Before sunrise, Caleb walked downstairs and found Richard waiting in the kitchen. "Where are you going?" his father asked. Caleb stopped at the door. "Back to the Mercer estate." Richard's face fell. "Because he is your husband?" Caleb shook his head. "No," he picked up his bag. "Because this time, going back is my decision." Alex was standing alone in the library when Caleb returned to the Mercer estate shortly after sunrise, and the expression on his face made it clear that nobody had warned him. "Caleb." He immediately looked toward the doorway, as if expecting someone else. "Did something happen?" Caleb stepped inside, carrying one suitcase and a bag filled with documents. "Yes, but not the way you think." Alex's gaze dropped to Caleb's left hand. The wedding ring was gone. Caleb saw him notice, but Alex asked no question about it. "You do not have to explain why you removed it," Alex said. "I know." Caleb placed the bag on the table. "That is part of why I came back." Alex remained several feet away. "If your family sent you to negotiate, we can meet with attorneys later." "My family did not send me." "Then why are you here?" Caleb opened the bag and removed the printed messages, summaries, and copied records. "Because Victor Hale and several people connected to him have been shaping information between our families for years. They recommended me for this marriage because they expected me to fear you. They prepared statements blaming you before they knew how you would treat me. They did not need the truth. They needed the marriage to fail." Alex read the first page, then another. His expression grew colder, but his voice remained controlled. "Have these been independently verified?" Caleb almost smiled. "That was exactly my next question." By noon, attorneys and neutral representatives from both families were reviewing the records. Caleb insisted that neither Alex nor Richard control the process. Original messages were compared with internal summaries, dates were confirmed, and enough inconsistencies emerged to justify suspending Victor from any role in the negotiations while a broader review continued. It did not erase years of mistrust, and it did not magically make the Mercers and Bennetts friends. It did something more believable. It gave both families a reason to stop treating every old assumption as fact. By evening, the representatives agreed to restructure the peace arrangement around independent mediation, financial transparency, and direct communication between designated negotiators. The marriage would no longer be required as a condition of the agreement. Caleb listened until the final sentence was read aloud, then looked across the room at Alex. For the first time since their wedding, peace did not depend on whether Caleb remained his husband. Later, after everyone had left, Caleb found Alex on the back terrace overlooking the grounds. "It is done," Caleb said. Alex nodded. "The revised agreement should hold without us." "Without our marriage," Caleb corrected. Alex looked at him. "Yes." The silence between them felt different now. There was no treaty hiding inside it. "You never asked why I came back," Caleb said. "You brought evidence that could protect both families." "I assumed that was the reason." "It was one reason." Alex waited. Caleb stepped closer. "I came back because when everyone else decided what my life was worth, you were the only person who kept asking what I wanted." Alex's composure slipped for a moment. "Caleb, you do not owe me affection because I respected a boundary." "I know. You do not owe me this marriage either." "I know that too." Alex looked toward Caleb's bare hand. "You took off the ring." Caleb nodded. "At my father's house." "Why?" "Because I needed to know whether coming back had anything to do with a promise I never freely made." Alex said nothing. Caleb continued. "I wanted to walk through those gates without the ring and see whether I still wanted to be here." "And?" Caleb looked at him steadily. "I did." Alex exhaled slowly. "That does not mean you have to stay. You really cannot stop giving me exits, can you? Not when everyone else has spent months closing them." Caleb smiled for the first time that day. "Then here is something you do not get to decide for me." Alex raised an eyebrow. That sounds dangerous. I want to stay tonight. Alex's expression softened. Your room is exactly as you left it. I know. And tomorrow? Tomorrow I decide again. Alex nodded. Fair. Caleb turned toward the house, then stopped. Alex. Yes. Thank you for letting me leave. Alex looked almost surprised. You never needed my permission. That is exactly why I came back. Caleb went inside, leaving Alex beneath the evening sky. The war had not ended because two enemies had been forced into marriage. It had begun to end when one of them refused to turn that marriage into ownership, and the other finally became free enough to discover that returning could mean something entirely different from surrender. 6 weeks later, Caleb stood in the same ceremony room where his future had once been negotiated by everyone except him. But this time there were no family representatives waiting for signatures, no attorneys checking treaty language, and no audience measuring whether two enemies looked convincing together. Morning sunlight crossed the empty floor as Alex entered carrying a thin folder. Caleb glanced at it. You have an alarming habit of bringing legal documents into important moments. Alex almost smiled. These are the final papers. Caleb already knew what they contained. The revised peace agreement had survived without their marriage. Independent mediators were working directly with both families, and the review of Victor Hale's actions continued through neutral representatives. The conflict had not vanished, but neither family needed Caleb's wedding ring to keep talking. Alex placed the folder on a table. Once we sign, the original marriage arrangement ends. Caleb looked at him. You sound very certain. I am. Even after I chose to stay? Especially after you chose to stay. Alex removed his wedding ring and placed it beside the documents. If there is ever going to be something real between us, I do not want it built on a promise you made because other people left you no reasonable way to refuse. Caleb felt the familiar ache behind his ribs, the one Alex seemed capable of creating simply by giving him another exit. They signed. No applause followed. No relieved families celebrated. Caleb removed his own ring from his pocket, where it had remained since the night he left the Bennett home, and placed it beside Alex's. For several seconds, they simply looked at the two circles of metal that had once represented obligation. So that is it, Caleb said. You are free. Caleb raised an eyebrow. I was free yesterday. Alex nodded. You were. And I stayed. You did. You are making this difficult. I am trying very hard not to make it easy for the wrong reason. Caleb laughed softly. 3 months passed. Caleb returned to his plans for graduate school, splitting his time between classes, applications, and a small apartment he chose for himself 12 miles from the Mercer estate. Alex never questioned the decision. They had dinner when both wanted to. They argued about coffee, books, and Alex's terrible habit of answering work messages during movies. They learned each other without a treaty demanding progress. Caleb discovered that Alex liked quiet Sunday mornings and hated surprise parties. Alex learned that Caleb reorganized bookshelves when anxious and refused assistance until he had tried solving a problem himself. Nothing about their relationship was required anymore, which made every ordinary choice feel unexpectedly important. One cool Saturday afternoon, Alex asked Caleb to meet him at the old ceremony room. Caleb arrived to find the space empty again except for Alex, standing near the windows. If there is another contract, Caleb warned, I am leaving. There is no contract. Attorney? No family counsel? Absolutely not. Caleb stopped in front of him. Then why are we here? Alex reached into his coat, but did not immediately reveal what he held. Because the first time we stood in this room, everyone knew what they wanted from us except us. Caleb's expression softened. Alex continued, I cannot change that day. I can only make sure it never decides what happens next. He opened his hand. Caleb's old wedding ring rested on his palm. Alex did not offer it yet. Caleb Bennett, would you choose me if choosing me changed nothing except our lives? Caleb looked at the ring, remembering how heavy it had felt after the ceremony, how often he had stared at it while wondering whether duty and fear were the same thing. Then he looked at Alex, the man who had been given power over him and had spent every day proving he would rather lose Caleb than own his choices. Yes, Caleb said. Alex's breath caught. Caleb smiled. You can ask the rest now. Alex laughed quietly, emotion breaking through the composure Caleb once mistook for coldness. Would you marry me? Yes. Only then did Alex offer the ring. Caleb took it himself and slid it onto his finger. Months earlier, that same ring had been placed there to hold two families together. Now it belonged only to two people. Caleb reached for Alex's hand, and Alex let him choose the distance between them. Outside, the world remained complicated. The Mercers were still Mercers, the Bennets were still Bennets, and peace still required work from people who had inherited years of distrust. But none of that stood between Caleb and Alex anymore. Their first marriage had begun because everyone feared what might happen if they refused. Their future began with something far simpler and far stronger. Caleb had been given every opportunity to leave, and Alex had accepted every possibility that he might. In the end, the marriage had never taught Caleb how to belong to Alex. It had taught both of them that love meant nothing without freedom, and when Caleb finally chose Alex with no treaty, no pressure, and no consequence waiting behind the answer, the word yes became theirs for the first time.